So when you wrote the Resource Management and Capacity Planning Handbook, what were you trying to solve? What came about?
Well, the first problem was there were no books on the topic. So I was
This
trying to
is
find
true, there aren't.
yeah. I was trying to find a resource management book. I couldn't find any, so I thought, I guess that means I have to write one.
Yeah.
So I decided to write a book. But once I got started, the biggest thing for me is I wanted to demystify resource management because there are so many
Mm.
different thoughts of it and things like that. I wanted to put, I mean, I wasn't looking to have the definitive uh, definition of everything, but I wanted to put a framework around it and raise awareness of the strategic importance of resource planning, which a lot of people really undervalue, and also to address the human side of resource management, since fundamentally it's all about people, and the term
Yeah.
resources tends to be so broadly used.
Yeah. Yeah. You actually bring up such a good point. And with my 6+ years now, specifically in this space and working with resource managers, project managers, portfolio managers, the concepts are the same, but the terms being used and the definition of those terms can be completely different organization to organization. So in my opinion, I think that terminology sometimes gets in the way of progress and people get really hung up on those words. In your experience, why do you think that's happening?
Well, first, I completely agree. It really does get in the way. And I think people don't know where to begin. There's no agreed upon universal lexicon, so to speak.
Yeah.
We have terms like, I'll rattle off a bunch of it, resource management, resource planning, capacity planning, staffing, workforce planning, strategic workforce planning, then the operational workforce planning. And I was just on a team that created a standard for workforce allocation. Then you have resource allocation, of course. So, so many of these terms overlap. Many of them are interchangeable, or some of them. So as I mentioned, I was on the ISO team. We created the ISO standard for workforce allocation. That was aligned with the workforce planning standard. But
Mm.
my point is, in general, ISO uses the term workforce because it's an international team, and they claim resource has so many meanings beyond people, which is true, and that compounds the problem, I think.
Yeah. It's really funny because as someone who, the host of this podcast and also someone who creates a lot of content, whether it's written, whether it's presenting at conferences or video, I find myself, trying to focus on, okay, what terms are actually going to resonate with this audience?
Right.
Because I want to make sure I'm speaking in a way where everyone feels, one, like I know what I'm talking about because, well, I hope I do, I should say. And two, I want to make sure that they are understanding also what I'm saying as well. And I think those terms really, really get in the way. And I'm glad
Yeah.
I'm not the only one who thinks that. I'm glad you called this out in the book.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a
So,
big issue.
yeah, I agree. With that said, knowing that there are so many different terms and that is blocking, that it can be such a blocker just in the concept, what are the core concepts that leaders need to actually understand, regardless of what they're calling them?
I think regardless of what people call them, I think there's some kind of long-term staffing, let's say, and that should be, I say should be because it often is not, but it should be some kind of a collaboration between HR and, let's say, the PMO, who's, I think, in an ideal position to do this kind of thing. But this tied to strategy and tied to annual operating planning. And that's the long-term staffing. It says the people that we're hiring, that we're bringing in, are they meeting the needs, and what are the needs? So, do we have that visibility? And then there's some kind of long-range requirements, resource requirements planning. Let's say it's 3 months out. I mean, let's face it, you can't see far, much beyond that kind of a horizon. But you're saying, okay, we're going to need these kinds of resources for these projects, for this next quarter and coming in. And then there's a medium range resource planning. Let's say that's 6 weeks out or even 2 months out.
Hmm.
And then there's resource allocation, which tends to be shorter term because you don't really have visibility at that level of granularity. And then the last thing I always point out, which often gets overlooked, is the ongoing reallocation as priorities shift. And
Yes.
not haphazardly, just like oscillating, but as part of a process. So everything
Hmm.
else, I think, is variations on those themes.
Yeah. I really like how you bring it down to into kind of like, okay, what is the, dare I say, like top of the funnel with that long-term staffing and planning? And I like that you mentioned how HR and the PMO are really in a good place for that. We'll come back to that later. And you
Sure.
really kind of break it down into, okay, the long-term staffing and then looking at those resource requirements months in advance. And then also, okay, what's coming up? And, the allocation for the shorter. And yes, I think the point as well that a lot of people forget is there is a management piece to resource management, if that's what you choose to call it, or workforce management, which is, the things that we have planned, that we looked at 4 weeks, 6 weeks in advance, 2 months, whatever. Is that actually happening? And if it's not, we need to be adjusting in real time and making sure that what is going on is reflective of, our data is also aligning with that. I think that's
Right.
really important.